uh, private orgs route, kind of state department, government jobs, or I decided to go into kind of certification licensure type the industry. So more on that to come though, but let's just think. So yeah, so psychometrician, right? Like what the heck is that? I don't know if a lot of you are familiar with psychometricians or what we do. Um, I pretty much I make tests, right? And so that's the simple fact, matter of fact. That's a simple thing. I make tests. Anytime there's any sort of standardized tests, any tests you have to pass for certification, for college admissions, for to get your nursing license, even like a lot of doctoral exams, prelims exams, the more standardized ones, performance assessments, a psychometrician was involved, right? We're not content experts, but we are testing experts. So we work alongside with the content experts to kind of make sure that the test scores are reliable, make sure there's enough validity evidence to support the test scores. So like pretty much litigation doesn't really happen, right? So that's what I do. I say measuring constructs because usually when you're measuring like a table or chairs, we have a ruler to do that. But what we measure, psychometricians measure, is that we measure things you can't really see or touch, right? We measure things you can't use a ruler to measure. Constructs, knowledge, skills, abilities, right? Math ability, happiness, anything that anyone wants to measure, they would come to us. And then we work with them to design the instrument, design the whole process of creating scores, creating factors, kind of validating these factors, making sure that we're actually measuring what we're intending to measure. That's those are the things we do. Focuses a lot on kind of psychological theory with statistics, lots of statistics. And here I have a couple of tests shown here that are typical things that I've kind of helped work on before, like employee selection, right? A lot of times these employee sexual selection works on these non-cognitive factors, right? A lot of jobs, organizations, they want to choose workers that are strong in certain kind of habits, certain behaviors, right? And so we work with them to kind of create these instruments and validate these factors, these constructs, so they can give out these assessments to prospective employees. Career decisions, right? A lot of career stuff. These are kind of like PSAT type assessments to kind of tell you what you're good at. So that kind of gives you an indication of what you can do when you grow up. Intelligence test is pretty big. I was actually looking at, we deal with a lot of data and patterns of responses. Intelligence tests, there are a lot of intelligence tests. The time that I've worked with intelligence tests is because there are a lot of intelligence tests that shows Hmong refugee kids as being kind of by definition mentally retarded because they are more than two standard deviations below the mean. And so I got involved when some colleagues came to me and and told me these kids they can raise their hand, they know they need to go to the restroom, they know when they need to ask for help. They are good, but their intelligence test scores shows that they are mentally retarded. And so you need to help me. We got to do something about this to get them out and get this label off of them. And so I've worked with intelligence tests and data to kind of provide evidence to support that these intelligence tests, they're invalid for this group, this subgroup, right? And so a lot of times these tests, they're kind of normed. They're given to a population and normed. And so if a lot of times these smaller groups, like the Hmong students, they're not a part of this normed group, right? And so when they create like the standard deviations and the confidence intervals around what is good and what is like proficient, what is intelligent, what is not intelligent, we're not part of the conversation. And so a lot of times a lot of times there are barriers, right? Language barriers that comes into play that affects these tests, but these tests are supposed to really supposedly like kind of invariant to language barriers, right? But they're not. And so I came in, I helped out with that, helped as much as I can, and then I was dropped. I was dropped from helping out after a while just because of all the red tape. But I digress. But other tests are college admissions tests, right? You're familiar with, right? SAT, GRE, so all of those tests has a psychometrician involved. Certifications, licensure, that's kind of what I'm doing now. I'll get into that a little bit. History of psychometrics. This actually came about from the Chinese, maybe like 2000 plus years ago. They had actually test batteries to for job selection for their citizens, right? So citizens would take these tests, and depending on how much they know, they would get certain positions, right? So is actually, that was actually very novel back in the day. And then in the 19th century, that's when like Western civilization was like, oh, this testing thing is pretty cool. And so they started kind of like adopting this idea of tests, right? Kind of really started with like Charles Darwin and Sir Galton, right? His nephew, I believe. They wanted to kind of look at individual differences, and they needed to create measures, right? To look at individual differences, you need to create measures so you have something that you can operationalize from just the idea. And then from that, you can kind of look to see differences between different people. And so that's how it really came about into the 19th century. And because he was pretty famous, then all these other mathematicians and psychologists got into the game and they started kind of doing more with psychometrics. And it kind of blew up from there because then from then all these great minds just got into psychometrics and just advanced that theory. So pretty cool. And so here I talk a little bit about reliability and validity, just because that is the main focus of a psychometrician, right? To make sure that test scores are reliable, to make sure that if someone takes the test and if they were to somehow lose their memory and take the same test again, the accuracy, they would have a similar score. And so that deals with the reliability, right? Reliability is kind of like um, a linear, how would I say this? Reliability is just linear consistency, right? I would say that everyone understand that, like a linear consistency of test scores, invariant to time, right? And then validity is just really the extent to which we can provide evidence to support our test scores, right? A lot of times people make inferences, interpretations, conclusions from test scores, and we need to provide evidence to support those inferences, interpretations, and conclusions. Typically, if there is no evidence to support it, then the the decision makers, the stakeholders, they shouldn't be making certain decisions or certain inferences or conclusions, but they still do, which is bad. But then our role is to provide evidence to support what we can say about scores. We give meaning to scores, provide evidence to support those meaning of scores. That's what we do in a nutshell. Psychometrician, it's a lot, but maybe it's not a lot too. I don't know. But how I got into this actually, I have a bachelor's degree in mathematical statistics. I had no idea what I was going to do with that, honestly. I wanted to go into engineering. Didn't like the fact that engineers had to kind of bow down to business people who didn't know what they're talking about. And then I found statistics, and statistics is really cool because different from like mathematics, which is proving stuff, statistics, you get to test things, and that's the whole basis of statistics to provide mathematics to test certain hypotheses. But then after I got my degree, growing up, I had a lot of mentors, a lot of role models who were teachers. And so I was like, oh, okay, I'll be a teacher. Took teaching courses, was about to be a teacher. And then I came upon a conference where there was a presenter that presented this item, right? It's not this item specifically, right? But then it was something like this. Like Bob makes $5,000 each month. How much does Bob make annually, right? Did I even spell annually correctly? But anyways, that was the question. And at that time, I had been in the teaching program for 2 years. I had students I was working for like a really large metro school district in the upper Midwest, right? And so for this particular school district, there's about like 56% of the seventh graders got this item incorrect from the district, right? And this school district has a lot of Hmong kids. And so what happened was the I mean, I saw the item. You see the item, you look right away, I mean, I say you, but I think I think people, language learners, right? People who had no different language, you know exactly. I think it's the word annually that's tripping students up, right? I think that's the word. I'm pretty darn sure that's the word. But then when it went to the school districts and the leaders, they looked at this and they said, huh, these seventh graders, they don't know how to multiply. So what they did was the following year in eighth grade, they forced teachers to reteach this cohort multiplication for like 3 weeks. And that was just beyond me. I was kind of like, what the heck are they doing, right? As someone who worked with this cohort of students, I was just kind of I was pretty upset, right? I was pretty upset. The presentation talked about item bias, how this is bias, right? And so at that time, I was kind of mad. Social justice to me was kind of like, dang, this is messed up. Maybe I can do more than be a teacher, right? I had this statistics degree, on my belt. Not a lot of people like statistics. Maybe I can do more for students than just be a teacher and focus on the teach students in my classroom. And so what I did was I took item bias, I talked to the presenter, looked up item bias, looked up what the heck it was, figured out psychometrics, right? At that time, oh, psychometrics, I don't know what it is. Um, but it seems like, you know, statistics is heavily involved. I know statistics. Sounds good. This was like in November. I did my research, did the whole finals thing. Winter break. I caught up an old friend of mine. Me and my old friend, we always go out for a noodle, we'll eat some pho, and then we talk, right? And this friend of mine, he was kind of faculty member at Concordia University. And so we talked, and then I kind of said, oh, yeah, I just went to this presentation, item bias, blah, 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 psychometrics. And then he was like, oh, Kory, I know someone. And so he's like, yeah, I know someone from the U of M. They're in this field. He's like, I can connect you. And so I was like, all right, yeah, sure, why not? Nothing to lose. So then he connected me with my advisor, which wasn't my advisor then, but then we met at the Purple Onion, which is a coffee shop in at the U of M 1 week later. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I walked in there and I pretty much got into the program. And so I pretty much I talked about item bias. I talked about how I felt that, like a lot of times with these tests, it's always these blonde hair, blue eyes, white males who do well in this test. And my thinking is that because the people who write the test are these old blonde hair, blue-eyed men who are writing the test. So it only makes sense that the young white men are understanding how the old white men are writing these assessments, right? And so I went off on a rant about all of that and about my statistics background and item bias and how I felt that I can kind of, be a representation for Hmong people. If I'm up there, I'm representing Hmong people when writing these items. Maybe these items would be these item bias, this kind of mistakes would be minimized. And so he liked me, and he was like, actually, thanks for meeting me. I'm actually the chair of the department. And at that point, I didn't know what the heck a chair of the department was. I had taken my GRE. I was thinking about going to grad school, but then I was in a teaching program too. It didn't matter. And he's a chair of department. He's like, you're late, right? Admission, registration, all that stuff, it's kind of due in December. And honestly, if you wanted funding, you needed it done in November. And it was already like January. He's like, well, actually, we're gonna meet next week. And so he's like he pretty much told me how it worked, at least for this department. He was like, if there's a faculty member that likes your research, then you're in. It's just that simple. I'll vouch for you, yada yada. Just need to get in your application and everything in by the end of the week, right? This is like Sunday. I had until Friday. And so that week it was just kind of like paying the application fee, signing up, writing my short play. I think I had like a 5-page paper. At the time it was long, but nowadays 5-page paper, like anyone who knows they gone to grad school, 5-page paper is like short and sometimes even harder to write than a 20-page paper. But I got all that out of the way. I sent it in. I don't even think they looked at my paper, honestly. Uh, Monday came by, they were meeting, and then I had exchanged phone numbers with him. And then he's like, he just called me in the afternoon. And he's like, all right, Kory, you're in. Get ready. Boom. Hung up, done. And I say like it's just like I don't know how it happened. It was like a whirlwind, but somehow I got in. And so I think sometimes for some of you young folks, just take risks, go and meet people. And once I got in, he got me in. He like put me into his research group, and I was in the research group before I was even a student, and all that just helped so much. And so, you ever get a chance, just get into some research group, some lab, go and do your due diligence and put the effort. People will see, people will notice you, and good things will come. But back to where I'm at. I got into grad school, and so when I talk about item bias, typically item bias is a very broad term. It's a very broad term, and by a term by itself doesn't mean too much, right? It just means that the item kind of disadvantages some students and gives advantages other students. Typically in my field, that is okay. That is normal, right? Some people have advantages, other people have disadvantages. The only time it becomes an issue is if if you do something what we call differential item functioning. It becomes an issue when you condition on ability and you compare the two groups, right? So let's say the exam scores goes from 0 to 100. You would compare, let's say a male and female who scored in the 90s, who scored in the 80s, scored in the 70s, scored in the 60s, like all those groups. If there was a pattern of like the male student doing better every single time on that particular item, then that moves past item bias, and that will be flagged for item that has diff, right? And so that item should no longer be a part of a test because now condition on ability, it's not working. And so that is only when an item has diff, it goes beyond item bias. It's really bad and it needs to be taken out of the exam. And so that's what I learned throughout my time in grad school about diff, item bias. Doesn't really do anything, right? Because you compare groups, it does do something, right, in terms of items, but in terms of for what I went in for, I went into school for kind of like this kind of opportunities that certain groups didn't have, and so they didn't have certain knowledge, right? And so if that were the case, that's not diff. That's just because they don't know the stuff, right? You would compare them to someone who knows the stuff. And it's like, these people know the stuff, they got it right. These people don't know the stuff, they didn't get it right. Nothing wrong with the item, right? In terms of testing, that's what we care about. And so I'm still trying to figure out a way to kind of figure out how to look at culture and look at kind of background and how that can be affected by test items. But that's something else. I tend to go on a tangent too, guys. So feel free to stop me. Part of being a psychometrician, I'll follow my PowerPoint. Classical test theory and item response theory. These are the main theories that we have as psychometricians. These pertain specifically to item response data, pertain specifically to kind of tests or performance level data or survey data. That is kind of like that is our main theories that back up our field. But that is just the psychometric piece, right? As a psychometrician in grad school, I was trained to be a methodologist. I was trained to design research, design constructs, right? That just kind of comes with the trade itself, right? We do all that. So a lot of these like profile analysis, hierarchical linear modeling, explanatory IRT models, kind of like the general linear model, general linear mixed models. Um, all these are more like statistical approaches. And so we are required to kind of have this under our belt as well because we design research. And so part of designing research is when someone comes to us and tells us, I want to measure this. I want to see if this affects certain group. As someone who is a psychometrician, I had to be like, okay, what kind of data are you going to get? How big is your sample? How many people can you get to take this assessment? We have to ask them a bunch of questions to kind of figure out what kind of data they're going to get. Because depending on the data they're going to get, that's going to be what sort of research analysis that we can kind of tell them that would be appropriate for them, right? And so a lot of these we have to have under our belt, and we have to figure out the best way to kind of answer the question. A lot of times, though, people come to us and they already have the instrument built, they already have the data, and they want us to work magic, and it just doesn't work that way. And so, future planning, if you want to, before you're going to do any sort of research, be sure to plan out how you're going to get your data, what type of data you're going to get, work on your instrument. That way, you can actually kind of do the sort of analysis you want. Um, that's my plug. But anyways, I actually have a lot of cool papers about some of these things. But like I was telling Tui earlier, like how psychometricians give presentations is um it's all a bunch of equations and formulas. It's not really words, and we just kind of explain the mathematical concepts and the theory behind these formulas. And even me, sometimes I listen to some psychometrician talk, I fall asleep because it's so boring. Unless it's like related to you. But these things are really cool. I'm just not gonna show you the equations and talk through the equations with you. But I'll give you the gist of the concept of what they are, right? So profile analysis, sometimes I like profile analysis because profile it does exactly what it says, right? It gives a profile, right? So this is really when you want to explain variation in certain groups. You want to look at the profiles of those groups, and this is a specific way of looking at mean and variance of the groups based on the profile. This is typically done with sort of a qualitative or data that's not continuous. Sorry about this. Yeah. And so profile analysis is really helpful. You want to do on survey data, you want to do it on sort of data that doesn't have a correct answer, polynomous type items. Um, and then HLM, hierarchical linear modeling. A lot of times when I look at educational data, I like to use hierarchical linear modeling. This takes into account different levels of data that can affect or explain variation, right? Variation is like the spread of data, spread of scores. Kids get a lot of scores, right? A lot of times the score is due to the kids' factors, variables in the kid's life, their abilities. A lot of times it has to do with the school they go to, right? How do you figure that out? You have to run a hierarchical linear modeling to take into account the variation from the school that can explain why the kid is getting the score they're getting, right? And if I say kid, but I say kids, multiple kids, right? A lot of the statistics I do deal with large samples, right? There are other sort of statistics that I've helped with where there are smaller samples, like single subject design type research. And for those type of research, it involves different sort of analysis. Um, I'm not the biggest believer of those, but I can understand why they do those research, and that's totally fine. You gotta deal with what you can, right? Explanatory IRT models, that is kind of like actually more of a psychometric model. It just with IRT models, oh man, I don't want to get into this. I'm sorry. All right. It's this really cool model that explains that could explain why certain groups respond to items in a certain way, right? And so it gets into response processes. We look at behaviors, right? Nothing really cool like fMRIs. Although fMRI, if you quantify those into data, we can use some of these models too. Neuroscience is pretty cool. I don't know much about it, but I've done a little bit of work with just helping neuroscience folks do their analysis. Um, Next, moving on. Sorry if I'm talking really fast. I get really excited when I talk about things I'm interested in, and when things I'm not too interested in, I talk kind of slow. But this I'm interested in. Hmong MSS, and so Minnesota has a survey, Minnesota Student Survey. They just give a bunch of random items, random questions to kids, all across, like from like third grader, fifth graders. 7th, ninth, 11th graders, right? And so we have like a sample size of about like over 300,000 every single it's given every 3 years. So every time the survey is given, we get like over 300,000 candidates, it's kids who have to take it. They have to take it in school. But then the cool thing about this is that these are kind of questions that ask about after school activities, kind of bad behaviors, teacher support, school support, how kids feel about themselves, uh, questions about that, right? And so it's like non-academic related. So we call these non-cognitive factors, right? Cognitive being more like for achievement, non-cognitive being more like, um, I don't know, I guess I would say that's kind of just behaviors. I don't know the right terminology that some of these other people use, but it's pretty much kind of like self, how you feel about yourself, confidence, things, those kind of constructs. So what this is really cool is that as a psychometrician, this is like playground for me, right? It's free data that's just about random stuff that I care about, right? And so what we do is that we find items that relate and we create measures from these items. So it's kind of secondary data analysis. But then we go through if anyone's familiar with like factor analysis, like we confirm factors based on like a priori theories, and we create measures from this survey. And from that survey, we were able to kind of get kind of school achievement data and kind of connect the data, merge them together. And then from here, I was able to separate even further by Hmong students because this is one of the few surveys that asks for it lets you select Hmong as ethnicity. And so, being Hmong myself, I've always wanted Hmong data, but like I think last week they talked about how as grad students, it's so hard to get data. It's so hard to get advisors to kind of get on board to support you and get data for you. So, as grad student, you can't get data at all. And so, this is part of the research group that I was in grad school, and we were able to kind of get this data. I was able to kind of look at profiles of Hmong students in Minnesota. And this, yeah. And so it was really neat. It turns out that like there's a lot of questions that ask about like, do you want to go to school? Do you want to graduate? There's like 97% of Hmong students, they want to graduate. But then when you actually look at the actual graduation rate for Hmong students, it's like in like the 60%. Um, and so that's kind of like our argument that, these students want to graduate. Something's going on here, Like what's up with the schools? Because with this, then we were able to actually go and meet with the State Department to kind of represent our research and kind of give recommendations on the survey itself. And so we got to present like a lot of this data talking about certain of these groups that they want to graduate, but they're not graduating. So something's going on. You need to find more support, right? And so in terms of how my field or how something I do it can help kind of education, help the community. That this is one of the things that I really wanted to do and kind of keep working on, but there's a lot of red tape at the State Department too, and that's its own story. But we got research out there. We're able to kind of go and kind of provide research saying, something's happening. You guys have to look into this, right? And so that's kind of ongoing. And even today, the research group, they're still looking at this. It's really cool stuff. Factor analysis. A lot of times when you have one item, you don't get a lot of information. But when you combine multiple items into one construct and you create a score, now that construct has more meaning. It provides you more information. And so that's the benefit of like factor analysis, the benefit of kind of utilizing these psychometric kind of theory and techniques to provide more information within one score, right? Because anyone who knows statistics, if you use multiple variables, then that kind of inflates the type one error. And so like sometimes what you want to do is you can kind of combine many of those items into one score. So you have just one score and you're really only adding 1 degree of freedom and it's yes, I won't yeah, so it's better that way. Next up, Hmong Igdees. Actually, Tuya and me, we were just talking about Tuya is actually an uncle, but then but Tuya, we're actually talking about learning Hmong earlier, and he was talking about how with his kids because they live out where there's not a lot of Hmong kids. it's difficult to kind of learn the culture and speak Hmong kind of consistently and get them exposed to it. And I was telling him, like, I live in Minnesota. There's a lot of Hmong kids here. But I have a similar issue, but then different. My kids, I have five kids. Man, they could speak Hmong really well until they were 5 years old, and then they started going to school, and it wasn't cool anymore to speak Hmong, right? Their friends didn't speak Hmong; they spoke English to them, and so then now they're like intentionally avoiding speaking Hmong because it's not cool to speak Hmong in school. So that's a all different issues. But then during my time in grad school, I was like, oh man, we need to get data on home. We gotta do something to like for like my biggest thing was like a lot of Hmong men at the U of M, they were starting school in their first year. They were like there's usually always more men than more women. When they start freshman year, boom, sophomore year, boom, switches. For some reason, Hmong men just drop out and disappear, and then Hmong women stay, and then more Hmong men graduate. But somewhere along the way, Hmong men are just disappearing from school for whatever reason. That was kind of my actual interest in looking at Hmong data. Couldn't get Hmong data, and but then I found Hmong IGDs. Hmong IGDs is so context with pre-K, right? Hmong IGDs is a pre-K assessment, screening assessment for Hmong kids, all in Hmong. Um, One of the biggest thing that psychometricians have done in terms of testing is to provide enough evidence to support pre-K that kids that take pre-K, they start at like by the time they start in kindergarten, and by the time kids finish kindergarten, the ones who start pre-K are at least 1 year ahead. By the time they in third grade, they're like 4 years ahead of those who aren't in pre-K. And so that with all the evidence that has been done on kind of just pre-K schooling and data, uh, it has gone to like policy. And so now there's a lot of policy that supports this idea that pre-K is crucial for your kids to kind of stay ahead of the game versus not going to pre-K, right? In terms of being ready for kindergarten and all that. Bring this into home, we're like, okay, so pre-K is very important. How about Hmong? Can we do Hmong, learning Hmong in pre-K, right? And so at this time there were still a lot of Hmong younger kids who were kind of 1.5 generation. They are recent refugees, and so research says that for kids to learn a language, you should be either really good at Hmong or really good at English, and then you'll be okay academic wise. If you're like half Hmong, half English, those are the kids that struggle, right? Those are the kids that struggle. They don't half Hmong, half English, then they tend to just not have a wide vocabulary and they tend to have a hard time with reading comprehension, right? And then if you have a hard time reading comprehension, that kind of aligns with math because like typically as a psychometrician, when you give a test, you want it to be unidimensional. You want to be measuring one thing, but then that only works for reading because actually in math, you have to have a certain level of reading comprehension to even understand the problems to do the math. So a lot of math tests are kind of like you're not just measuring math, you're measuring reading ability as well. So that's why you see a lot of people do really well in math. They also do really well in reading, just because there's two constructs actually when you're learning math. That's just a side note. But bringing that back really quickly, I'm sorry, I'm jumping into too many tangents. Bringing that back to kids and their vocabulary and what they know. Um, so what we kind of encourage, right, is you just know like half Hmong, half English, then you tend to do much worse in academics. You know all English, you tend to do well academically in school in English. If you know all Hmong really well and you don't know any English, you tend to do really well too in school. Because when you know a lot of vocabulary, to translate that vocabulary, you know like zicheng, it's easy to translate that boom to banana, right? You just need a picture. If you don't know banana in Hmong or English, much more difficult. It's like learning a new word. And so we encourage people just, if it's too late, just focus on one language so they're really good so they can do well in school. But that's not to say there's not a lot of benefits to learning multiple language, right? Multiple language, right? it does something to the brain, right? I think there's a lot of research on that. It does something to the brain where your brain is just faster, you're quicker, further on in life. And so having like multiple languages, it's a benefit. Maybe hard at the beginning, but it's a benefit later on in life. Plus, also, it's your native language, and we want to kind of encourage people to learn the native language, right? Not to lose your language, lose your culture. And so with Hmong AGs, that's where like the main basis came from to kind of create this Hmong measures. And I was part of the team that kind of started off. When we started off, we didn't know what we were going to do. What should we measure? What words should we use? Like, what word do parents teach their kids in the households, right? We found some really interesting stuff through like focus groups, or just like randomly serving parents. They would tell us a lot of words. And then there was some correlation that some parents, like, they would only talk Hmong to their kids when when the kids are in trouble, right? But when the kids were not in trouble, they would tend to talk English. And so we were given some words, and some of these words were more kind of like had negative connotation, right? And so it's funny that that's how it was, but a lot of parents are like that. Also got a lot of pushback. A lot of parents are like, no, don't need to teach them Hmong and whatnot. And I kind of just ignored those, but then I noted, right? I think some of those older generation, they were worried that we're in a new country, right? We're a new country. Let's not try to bring this back. Let's kind of adapt to the culture and kind of do well. But then they weren't getting the point of it's hard to kind of convey what I want to say in Hmong to some of these older generation that I want to kind of retain the language of our kids. I want them to kind of learn Hmong. I want them to know Hmong, right? And it's kind of sad to say too, but then if there's not a test, no one's going to learn it, no one's going to teach it. And so as much as I'm in testing, but I don't really like testing, but as much as I don't like giving too many tests, if this test isn't there, then nobody's gonna really care about learning Hmong or teaching Hmong. And so we created the Hmong Igdis. It's up and running. A lot of pre-K knowledge like phonemic awareness, alphabet knowledge, verbs, things like that. We have in the Hmong Igdis. It's still going on today. I'm still working with them. Really cool. Sorry, I'm going on too much tangents. My wife was giving me a lot of how should I say this nicely? She was giving me a lot of good criticism to stop going off of tangents, but I tend to do that when I talk about myself and research. But anyways, so when I was in school, I was able to do research. I was able to teach undergrads. I was able to do a consulting. If you were in grad schools, definitely, and you had the opportunity to do that, really good experience. I did a lot of research. I love research. I hate writing. Decided I don't want to do that. Teaching, I like teaching. I just don't like teaching undergrads. So I'm not teaching. Consulting is cool. And so now I'm doing a little bit of consulting. All right. Okay. So which leads me to kind of my dissertation. I kind of got into my program with this kind of social justice mindset background. And so I kind of wanted to end with the same note. Right. And so this particular metropolitan district, no, actually it's the state. This Upper Midwest state, right? Which I live in, but I probably shouldn't be naming. This is how for Every Student Succeeds Act, districts, state, they're required to report kind of certain academic indicators to federal government, right? And so there are multiple things they report. Like they could report like high school pass rate, some non-cognitive measures, attendance, a few other things. They kind of have this black box. They put everything in there. Federal government comes to look at it. These are one of the indicators. This is probably one of the most math-heavy indicators, right? And so context about these indicators, in the past, these indicators would be used aggregate, it's low stakes, like the state test, right? It's low stakes for students, right? Students don't fail or anything, they just got to take it. But it's high stakes for schools, high stakes for teachers sometimes, because sometimes teachers get evaluated based on these scores. And so this is how they calculate some of these indicators, which is wrong. I mean, so what they're doing is they're taking kind of the students in the school and based off of which students kind of like pass are proficient, right? They count them and they divide by the total. But the thing about this is that they're counting students twice because they're counting all students and then they're counting every different group. So that means that if your school has a lot of white kids and you don't have a lot of students of color or students without free reduced lunch, it counts double against you. So your score looks much better. But if you have more free reduced lunch students, more students of color, uh, they tend to do worse, right? That's going to count double against you. So your score for your school is going to be lower. It just works out that way, just with the math itself. It's just bad. And like, I can't get stressed out enough. I mean, I tell them straight to their face and they just shut the door on me, but this is just bad. Like, don't do this. And so my dissertation was using this, and I created simulations. I generated data because they wouldn't give me data, but I was able to get data, summative data, like summary statistics. I was able to kind of create fake number of students with test scores based off the sample size of the school, right? I was able to kind of triangulate, get data, pieces of data from everywhere, right? A lot of this data is public, but they're not like student scores. But I simulated the scores. And then I ran a bunch of simulations with error distributions, right? Because my big thing is measurement error. Um, the state believes that measurement error will cancel out, so that it doesn't matter about measurement error. It doesn't affect student scores. My hypothesis was that no measurement error will not cancel out. It will cancel out at the state level, but then you're making decisions at the school level, so it's different because students aren't randomly assigned to a school, so you can't cancel out measuring error at the school level, right? That's the big argument I was making, and of course, my argument was true after my findings. Um, and so pretty much how I also use this method that they use to kind of aggregate to create this indicator. So every school got a score. I use that indicator. I use just the mean. I use a weighted mean. I use estimated true scores to kind of create the mean for the normal distribution to draw measurement error from for every single student. And yeah, how I in the ways that I use to create this indicator, it explained 37% of the variation of the accuracy, right? Accuracy wasn't that great, but then it explained 30%, 37% of why accuracy wasn't that great. And it turns out that just using the mean was much better than this academic indicator that they were using, which was kind of like the worst way to create scores because it was just inaccurate. It was just showing the schools, certain schools weren't doing well. And then I kind of finalized with like measurement error exists. I said it exists. It does exist because simply measurement error will cancel at the population level. Population level is the state. In our case, they're making decisions at the state level, which they shouldn't do. They can't do. And so measurement error doesn't cancel there. So schools that are inner city schools that have more low performing students, they have more measurement error in their scores. And schools that are like in rich white areas, they also have more measurement error, but they have positive measurement error, right? Because measurement error goes positive and negative. At the state level, it will cancel out, but at the school level, it doesn't. Some schools are just going to be have measurement error that's going to improve their scores, and others are going to have measurement error that decreases their score. And so, this is my dissertation. I kind of went and talked to them, and I don't have a good relationship with the state. I don't know if you guys get that sense. And so they didn't like what I was going to say. It's gonna kind of, I don't know, some sort of inner politics that works. But I don't, I was never trained in how to deal with that or navigate the political environment. So I just kind of left it at that. What I do today? Oh my gosh, dang, I have no time to talk about what I do. Certification, right? And so in academia, I'm trained to kind of construct measures, but for research. And so I was like the methodologist for a lot of people who are interested in research. In industry, now it's like for-profit testing. Now I am constructing measures, but then more for tests. Right? I help design tests. Um, I help design the test. I help kind of figure out the domains, right? So a lot of times people come in with the idea like, I want to give a test on math, eighth grade math, right? As an example. And then help me kind of figure out the domains and break down math, right? Math is an idea, it's a construct. We need to operationalize mathematics. We need to break down mathematics into different parts, right? Because mathematics is very broad. What part of mathematics do you want to measure? Eighth grade. In eighth grade, maybe it's like algebra, geometry, maybe it's just like and just simple addition, um, yeah, word problems, right? And so we break it down to those four domains, which is more of what we can measure from mathematics. But then it's still kind of an idea, so we need to operationalize it into something that we can measure, which we can quantify, right? Into kind of numbers. And so from there, we get a bunch of experts. This is called a job task analysis in the field. We get experts to come and break those down into kind of measurable statements. Once we get those measurable statements, we have to write items to represent those measurable statements. Right? It might be kind of like solve for X might be one of the measurable statements. And so we need to create items to represent this solving for X, right? Maybe three equations, three unknowns, right? Just a regular solve for X, right? X equals 2, 3x equals 6, solve for X kind of deal. So we create a bunch of items. Those items get vetted. Those items get piloted. Items we do a analysis, right? We get something like this back where we get kind of characteristics of the items, items that perform like pretty bad, like this item right here, like negative 0.32 item discrimination. That's really bad. This item will have to get reviewed and taken out. It can't be used in the live form, right? Based on the statistics, it doesn't work. Something's wrong with it. And so we make decisions. And we also look at like option analysis, right? So every item, there are different options. People choose options, right? Here, if we look at, we typically look at difficulty and discrimination. Difficulty is the how difficult the item is. Discrimination is how well the item distinguishes between someone who knows the stuff and someone who doesn't know the stuff. And so we never want discrimination to be negative because that means it's not doing a good job. That means the students who don't know the stuff, they're doing good. And the students who do know the stuff, they're doing bad on the item. And so for in this particular case, the key is A, right? A is the correct answer, but if you look at discrimination, it's negative. And then if you look at option B, discrimination is positive and the difficulty is pretty good, zero point 0.4. And so from this, I don't even know what the item is, but I already know that actually this is probably a miskey. I don't think A is the correct answer. B is probably the correct answer. And no one selected D, so that's just probably a bad option. But B is probably the correct answer. You need to go back and look at this item, fix it. A lot of times they don't tell us what the item is. They just give us stats and response patterns, and we tell them exactly what it is. And most likely it ends up being correct, or the item is written wrong, and kind of candidates or students are interpreting the item in a different way. When we look at items, we look at these are called item characteristics curves. Um, th this is kind of where the item lies in terms of the spectrum of the ability. In IRT, uh, I'll just tell you, just take my word for it. In IRT, the ability, it puts the test score ability and the student, the person ability on the same scale. So that's the advantage of IRT. So this x-axis counts as individual's ability as well as the ability and difficulty of the exam. So as you can see here, a lot of these items are around this area. And so a lot of times when you create a test, you want to create a lot of put a lot of items around like the cut score or what's passing and that, because then you can get the most information, right? So from this set of items, we get like an information function, which shows that where the information is. Here you see that a lot of information is here. So a lot of items provide information at this section. So for students with an ability of like between 0 and -1, this test does a really good job at assessing whether they know the stuff or not. But students that are really strong or not really strong in terms of this ability, it doesn't do a good job in measuring what they know because there's just not enough information there. But oh my gosh, there's like 5 minutes left. I will stop. I was gonna go and like start talking about I have some takeaways. I was gonna talk about some formulas, but I'll stop it there and hopefully people got something out of it. Here's my biggest takeaway. Be a student of life forever. You never know. You'll learn something new and go on a different path. Find your why, man. Like if you want to go grad school, you need to find your why. Otherwise, it's gonna be a long few years. And then like mentorship, I think mentorship is the best way to kind of get ahead. It's who you know, right? Not so much what you know. Um, and yeah, I will leave it at that and I will stop my sharing. Thank you. Any questions or anything you want to ask me about this field? Do you want to learn more? I mean, I'm a methodologist, social science. We are kind of We don't deal with the hard sciences, but we deal with numbers and data. So, question, yeah, I think.
No, I was just sorry, I pressed one, but Pacon actually has a question, so she
Oh,
could answer.
okay, okay.
Yeah, no, thanks, Corey. That was really interesting. I'm a data person, but not so much a numbers like statistical person like you. So it's clear that you really love your job and you're really passionate about it. For me, somebody trained as an academic researcher and then now working in a space where we're starting to think about clinical trials for disease communities. I just feel like the type of work that you're doing is really important for those spaces because we have to really start thinking about equity. Making sure that if we're running these clinical trials, we are designing them so that they fit not just the typical Caucasian community, but all, a diverse community because we know that cancer and diseases are, they don't really discriminate. I mean, sometimes they do, but most of the time it hits everyone. And it makes me think to the again, like you had referenced last month's call, just how important it was and but how difficult it was to actually try to gather data from the Hmong community in a way that is useful and can, you know, sort of be turned into something tangible. So I think this work is really important. And I was just wondering too, I mean, I know you're working for a for-profit company right now, but I was thinking about like when you were in grad school, were you getting funded by the NIH? Were you guys, I mean, where was that funding coming from?
So yeah, for the Hmong ADs, I believe, I think we had, it wasn't NIH, it was a different grant. But I think because we have like, I think you have like a 2 year period for this grant, and then once it gets approved, then you get like 5 year period. And so we're now in that 5 year period. I don't know exactly what grant it is, honestly, but
Oh,
it's
that's all right. Yeah, I mean, usually it's NIH or NSF or maybe, through another, foundation or institution. But okay. Yeah,
yeah.
I just think again, like I'm obviously thinking very much like research, but I think this is so important for the up and coming researchers too, to think about how we can really design, research that is going to impact real people. And I think that there's really a high need for that within the Hmong community, especially with I think, lack of connection to doctors that we have, like certainly with like my parents' generation, and just trying to make sure that they're heard as well.
Yes, definitely. And I see a lot of like a lot of qualitative type research, a lot of kind of stories that are written about kind of the older generation, but like because I focus so much on the kind of the quantitative side, I agree with you. Like I'd like to get more data, people interested in kind of just doing kind of quantitative data, to research on these sort of things. I mean, I don't think people know enough. I mean, actually, like my advisor, because like in this field, there's so many international students that come to the department. My advisor was like begging me to find Hmong people to get into the program. He's like, we have funding, man, just get them in. I don't care if they're English majors. And I went out and I talked to a bunch of Hmong students, the undergrads, and they just weren't interested. It was just so like, I was just like frustrated. Like, come on, man, it's funding. It doesn't matter, right? You get a PhD. But I mean, yeah,
Yeah, no, yeah, that is frustrating. I think we always have to think about like, well, how do we make them care?
yeah.
And that can be difficult.
Thank you for your comment, though. I mean, yeah.
Can I
Any
ask a
other question?
question?
Yes.
Yeah, Corey, thank you for sharing your experiences. I have a question relating to confounders, and the measurement errors and stuff may be part of the uh, confounders, but I'm just wondering what are the like major ones that you've encountered, and I guess related to uh, the ESSA that you've been talking about, every student succeeds acts, relative to before that, with the No Child Left Behind Act. I remember back then, they were making us take these exams, and I just remember like classmates and stuff. thinking like these exams are so stupid, and they just mark certain answers just to get through the whole thing. And I don't know if like these are things that can be mathematically built in to account for, and the equations that you guys do, and not only that, but just moving forward too with more technology nowadays. Kids are using technology a lot now, and their learning is a lot different than how we were learning back then. And I mean, that's not a confounder, but just things that are taken into account for these mathematical modeling that you're doing.
Yeah, when you say confound, you're talking about like confounding variables, right? In terms of
Yeah, yeah.
bringing, yeah. Oh man. So to answer that, I'm not sure, right? So a lot of times, like a lot of times we're given the data that we're given, and we can't really do anything about it because we can't collect other data, right? So I know a lot of times when we run these models, we run into not just confounding variables, but specification error, right? Specification error is really when you don't have the right variables, but then you don't know what the right variables are. Then how are you going to go out and get those right variables? So I mean, I'm kind of avoiding your question because I don't know, I don't have an answer to it. But I think a big part of it is that we need, yeah, I mean, there are people out there who have like these ideas of, oh, this variable, right? We need this, but this is the variable. This variable is going to explain the most variation from these test scores, or explain why kids are behaving the way they are or scoring the way they are. But then like people just don't know. And sometimes, a lot of times, when people kind of go and collect data, they don't have the foresight or the expertise to kind of design their instruments or design their research so they can get the appropriate variables needed to run the model and answer the question they want. They just go out there, get data, and then they want to answer the question with data that isn't appropriate to answer the question. And so that's why I would say more than just the confounding variables, just that piece of just starting at the beginning and being very intentional about what you need to do is what's missing in a lot of like state departments, researchers, people who want to do well, but then they kind of jump the gun. And then to kind of talk about the every student succeeds at, that's the thing, right? Like these tests are low stakes for kids, right? Low stakes meaning it has no consequences. High stakes meaning it has kind of big consequences. These kids, whether they pass or fail, it doesn't matter, right? Um, to an extent, right? I think now it doesn't matter. They don't need to pass these tests to graduate. And so a lot of times they can just do whatever. And yeah, I I understand your sentiment of why use that data if a lot of kids are kind of just guessing, right? Because then once you aggregate the data, it gets a little bit better, right? You kind of regress it to the mean, and so you get a better picture of how kids are doing. Some kids are just kind of slack off. Other kids, they really try hard, and so that's why they take the means, right? It does make it better, but at the same time, it doesn't defeat the purpose of it. It's low stakes. But when it was No Child Left Behind, it was high stakes for schools and teachers because these scores, it's still aggregated in the same way, right? And but then at that time, teachers were being evaluated, schools were being evaluated, and schools were getting restructured, staff were getting fired. They had big consequences for how they were kind of running their numbers. And so I thought that I think it's an issue overall. I don't like it at all either, but then I don't have an answer to that too. But I totally understand what you're saying.
I guess, do you do machine learning?
Um, when I was in grad school, we did a lot of machine learning. This is before the whole big AI and language models, but at that time, machine learning was like, oh man, like it's just access to data, right? Because like machine learning, you need a lot of data. It's just a bunch of data. Just kind of run the data, maybe create some simulation data, bootstrap to get standard errors, things like that, and like play around with data. It's just playing around with data. And so that's the extent of my work with machine learning. Um, but then I never used it to, I don't know, like I never used it to kind of create anything even close to like what AI, like AIs and large language models that they have these days. It's just playing with data. So
Yeah, I was just thinking that based on what you're saying, I wonder if maybe right now even with machine learning, then it might be hard to say like, oh, maybe these group, for example, we you can already predict that, oh, they might struggle or something like that, right? I mean, I don't know, but yeah, certainly having more access to data and reliable data instead of just junk in and junk out, as they say, for
Yes, 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 definitely. I think access to data is very hard to get, right? Like I can't just go to a district and ask for data. I'd have to get a job there. I'd have to sign a bunch of waivers, and then they'd probably like give me data with someone kind of in charge. And so, because I've worked for some of the school districts here before, and they are just so tight. I don't know. They're just tight gripped with their data. I don't know why. I guess they think people would do something bad with the data, but um, if people don't have the data, then people can't really do research or anything, right? Also, and so I don't know what they're thinking, but there's a lot of red tape in the school districts, and I'm just not competent enough and good enough to navigate that political environment to kind of be able to get my hands on data, right? I think a lot of times the leadership there are very business minded, right? They get into the position from being very business minded and being very good at talking to the school board and parents and stuff. And it's not like the folks who are very good, like the director of like data, director of research. They're typically like not data people, right? And so it's hard to kind of get my foot in the door, I guess. And so yeah, crap in, crap out kind of deal because they won't release the good data for you. And yeah, but I mean, yeah, like I have similar ideas and questions too. Like, oh, if I could get this, I can do this, right? But then like, it's a big gap between not having data and getting that data. So yes, Tufu.
Yes, hi, Kory. Nice to meet you, and thank you for sharing your journey and your story with us. I really
Thanks.
enjoyed it. One thing that you mentioned earlier, you shared a story about the desire to graduate, and the outcome doesn't match the rate of the desires. Was there a root cause analysis done to assess how to increase the outcome to match the desire?
Well, so for us, we only have the survey data, right? So this is survey data that kids fill out anonymously, right? And so when we're doing the research by the group level, either by Hmong or by school. And so we don't know specifically individuals, and we can't connect them to whether they graduate or not, right? But then like just by the numbers alone, kids want to graduate. They're just not graduating, and all we can do is present that information to the school district. And so what they did with it, like we had no control. So I don't know what they did with it. I don't know. I'm sure they care, but I don't know if they I don't know if they would put that as their priority to kind of figure out what's going on, right? But then like as researchers and someone who was able to get access to the data from them, our role ended when we were able to disseminate the data back to them and the results. And I wish we could do more, but then
Yeah,
we just don't have the capability, I guess. And so, yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I just wouldn't be able to answer that.
thank you.
Hey, Kory, I think it's very informative talk. And, I think I appreciate, people like you to try to, take a active role to sort of contribute to the Hmong community in ways to, allow our kids to be maybe tested better, or to better assess not only Hmong kids, but all kinds of group. And I think having like a diverse background people will I think improve the test or improve measurements of student performance and student outcomes. So I think that's really great that you're doing that. My question is, like right now we have so much issues with AI, and I'm just wondering, like, in your like somebody with your expertise, is that something that an AI can, because I worry about that as a researcher too, right? There's some things I can do because I have to kill mice and like that. So AI can't do that. But a lot of the data analysis and the, and the writing of the reports and things like that, every day they're getting better to do that. And I'm just wondering in your, thinking with your expertise, whether, is something what you're doing potentially, I don't know, just based on cost saving or effectiveness and things like that, efficiency, they might somehow allocate it to AI to be the one to now do these psychometric measurements and developing tests and assessments and things like that. I don't know how you feel about that and what you think
Yeah,
on your side.
yes, AI is a interesting topic. That's like big in like in terms of like our field right now. But then there's not so much of fear of AI taking our jobs, right? There's more of a fear of like right now AI is not smart enough. Like AI is causing more headaches for us than it is helping us. Because because AI knows enough to be dangerous. There are a lot of clients who they'd rather not pay us to do certain things for them, right? For the test. So they go to AI, AI, they listen to AI. AI is not, AI lies,
Tools. It's a tool.
yeah, all the time. Right. And so they lie all the time. They don't really know what they're talking about just because like they're just pulling from everywhere. And so a lot of times what these people are doing, a lot of these clients are doing is that they're using AI, using AI's ideas, and they're going forward with the test. And then when they come to us to help them out, like it's like damage is done, like your test is horrible, right? I mean, you have crap data. Like we have no idea what's going on with your data. I mean, these items are horrible. It's not performing well. Like AI can't analyze those data, right? Like we have to analyze the data. We have to like write code, analyze the data. I mean, maybe AI could do that, but like you have to have some sort of expertise to like prompt AI to kind of analyze the data. You can't just say, here's the data, analyze it, right? And so in terms of like my job loss, I'm not too worried, but then AI does help make certain things more efficient, right? Because I do know the field, I know what I'm talking about. I just ask AI to do certain things and it can do it faster. And I can write the report faster. It can help me write code faster. And then what was I gonna say? I was gonna say something. I totally forgot. Lost track. But yeah, I'll leave it at that. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
maybe can you touch on a little bit? Like, I think Moa asked you this question about confounding factor, and you were talking about 有没有蒙了民谣，那就各天来路咪讲公司 like if you teach them to speak Hmong completely and they have more vocabularies that they actually do better. And I just wonder, like from our psychometrician's measurement, how do you take into account like maybe socioeconomic background, education of the parents, and things like that? Because those are also variables that could potentially have a huge influence on that. And, what do you use to determine whether it's truly the vocabulary, teaching somebody that compared to maybe it's everything else they're getting their parents about maybe much more involved in just making sure that they study, you know?
Yeah. So uh the the idea behind being really good at one is that's more of like in the psychology literature, the pre-K literature. And so I get that from the literature. In terms of looking at variables, confounding variables, to even make that assumption, I'd have to take the data and kind of model the data with those variables to see if they're explaining any variation, right? And so and a lot of times, like I was saying, like some of those variables, they don't like a lot of times if you're talking about social and economic status, like people give you free reduced lunch, right? That's like the worst indicator of social and economic status, right? Social economic status is a factor, right? Like the tema, you need like you could have free reduced lunch, you have father's income, father's education level, mother's income, mother's education level, right? Your network, like all of those will account for social economic status. But a lot of times, these variables will become confounding is because they're incomplete, right? They're one aspect of it that doesn't explain much variation, and but then they can be related to another variable, and which will lead to that confoundingness. And so I don't even know if I'm answering your question, but
You did.
it's just it kind of goes back to like crap in, crap out, like bad items, bad data, and it's not gonna really tell you the truth. right?